In this lesson, I want to cover how to test live redirects. We're going to cover part of the live navigation equation. So we're going to test navigation between a live view and a non-live view, and then between a live view and another live view in a saved live session. Of course, there's also live patching, but we'll leave that for the next lesson. So if you look at what we have, go ahead and open up your router, and you'll see we have a live session with two live views, the dashboard and the team live. And you can go ahead and open up the dashboard live. And what you'll find is a very simple live view. We're simply doing a little bit of rendering. We have a title here, dashboard, and the main thing we're doing is navigating between live views. If you open up the team live, you'll notice that it has the exact same nav bar in there. So the magic is happening in the navigation components. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'll go ahead and open up navigation components, and as you can see, it has this nav bar component that takes an active attribute. It's an atom. It could be either dashboard or team. And the primary thing is that we have two links here, right? So we have a link for dashboard and a link for team. And the interesting thing here, or the thing that's important for us, is that we're using the navigate strategy here. We could be using href if this were navigating to a live view that's outside the live session or to any other page that's not a live view. And of course, we could be using patch if this were a live patch. But in this case, we're using navigate because the two live views are in the same live session. So we're going to go ahead and test this. But in order to really understand the distinction between this and what it's like to test navigation without live views in the same live session, we're also going to test navigating from our live view to a non-live view. And we're going to do that. If you look at the app layout, you'll see that we have a link in our logo that is using the href strategy. So we're also going to test this just to do the comparison of how do we test navigating between a live view and a non-live view. And then we're going to compare that to how we test navigating between two live views in the same live session. All right. Now, if you want to look at all these things, go ahead and open up your browser and take a look at how the navigation works. You can see that the navigation between tabs is very quick because we're not doing the full page reload. But if you navigate to the logo to the top left, you're doing a full page reload because you're visiting a different page that's not a live view. Let's go ahead and dive into the test. I'll go ahead and open up my dashboard live, and we'll be doing all of our testing from the dashboard live's perspective. So that's where the test will live. And let me go ahead and open up the test for this. And of course, that lives under test, Ranger Web Live, Dashboard Live Test. And as usual, you have the done equivalent file next to this one if you want to look at the test that I wrote for this. So let's go ahead and get started by testing that we can navigate from the live view to a non-live view. So I'll go ahead and write a describe block here. Navigates to homepage. We're going to say outside of live session. Now let's go ahead and write our first test. And I'll call this when clicking testing live view. And I'm going to call this error tuple. Now, this isn't a great test name for a real application, but I'm trying to write them like this so we can distinguish them between the different cases we're about to test and how we're going to iterate through these. So let's go ahead and mount our live view. And I'll ignore the HTML. Take in the con, and let's mount the live view on dashboard. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab the view, and we're going to target that element that had the logo. If you remember this is on our app layout app. And we're targeting this link that uses an href. So once again, this is going to do a full page reload, right? It's going to visit a new page. So we're going to target that logo, and we're going to render click on it. Now what happens when we do this? LiveViewTest understands that we're redirecting to something that's not a live view. So it'll give us an error tuple, hence the name of the test. And here, it will contain another tuple that will tell us the strategy that's happening. This is a redirect. And then it gives us a map that says the to, and it gives us the path that we're redirecting to. So finally, we can make an assertion that we're being redirected to the path we think, right? So in this case, I'm going to assert that we're getting redirected there. So I'll go ahead and run this. Perfect, and we see a pass. But this leaves something to be desired. This makes it seem like we've encountered an error, like something unexpected. So if a fellow coworker comes later and takes a look at this test, they might think, oh, something is going wrong here. And really, nothing is going wrong. This is just how LiveView interprets this click. So what we can do is we can do a number of other things. Let's go ahead and see how we can write this test in a slightly better way. I'll go ahead and change this to assert redirect because we're going to use a helper called assert redirect. What we can do is rather than expect anything here, Phoenix LiveViewTest ships with a really nice helper that will give us the path and here a flash message if you need it. And we can say assert redirect and it takes in the view. And then we can make the same assertion about the path. So this is a much cleaner test because rather than have this error at the top, we're just going to say, hey, we expect this view to be redirecting, and we're going to expect this particular path. And if we actually had a flash message, we could test that here as well. So I'll go ahead and run this test. And we see a pass. Excellent. Now, this is a pretty good test, and I might leave it here. But sometimes we actually want to follow that redirection and make an assertion about what's on the next page. This can be particularly helpful if you're dealing with forms that then redirect. You can imagine this in a form where you submit the form and then you do a push navigate at the end, and you want to follow that and make sure that the thing you've created is actually present in the next page, just as an example. So there's another way to write these tests if you want to assert that. I'll go ahead and copy this test. And where it says assert redirect, I'm going to call this follow redirect. And what we'll do is here, after the render click, we're going to follow the redirect. And this is another wonderful helper from Phoenix LiveViewTest. And now this follow redirect needs to take in the result from render click, but needs to take in the connection struct, and it optionally takes the path that we expect to redirect to. And I think this is really helpful to include because this gives us the assurance that we're actually redirecting to the path we think we should be going to. Now, when we follow the redirect, this is going to give us an OK and a connection struct. It gives us that because we're going to a non-live view. So it's just going to give us the con. And here we can go back to what we used to do with controller tests. So what we can do is we can say that the HTML response for that connection struct, it's a 200. And we can then make assertions about the HTML. So in this case, for example, we might want to say that testing is included, and actually the testing LiveView title is a little more complex. There's a span around the LiveView, and so we're going to test it this way, right? So I'll go ahead and run the test and make sure it passes. Excellent. So this is how we test navigating between a live view and a non-live view, or navigating between a live view and a live view that's not in the same live session. And that happens because in both cases, we're using the link component, right, with the href strategy, right? But what about testing a link component with the navigate strategy, which is what we will test when we're navigating between two live views in the same live session? Well, let's take a look at how we can test that. I'll go ahead and create another describe block here and say navigates to another live view within live session. And once again, these test names are just going to be very descriptive of what we're doing. They're not exactly the best test names for an actual application. When you write them for your application, you want to write them from the perspective of the user. A user can navigate to the team page, for example. In this case, I'm going to say when clicking team, error tuple. Now, because we've already done this, you might have a guess as to what that error tuple means. And you would be 100% correct in guessing that it's going to be very similar to this. So when we're at the dashboard, we're going to go ahead and target an element here. And this is going to be, we have a data role that's called page link. So I'll target that. But there's multiple links on the page. So we want to click the team link. And so we pass the optional text filter. And then we're going to click on that. Now this error tuple is not going to have a redirect because the strategy is slightly different. This is going to have a live redirect, and then it's going to have the to in path. If you're writing these tests in a way that you want it to be agnostic of which strategy it's using, I would recommend just ignoring this argument, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a redirect or a live redirect from the perspective of the user, and then we can simply assert that the path is the correct one. So let's go ahead and, this should be /team. Let's go ahead and run this test. Excellent, it passes. But as with the previous example with error tuple, this leaves something to be desired because it's giving too much information about, one, the implementation of LiveView underneath the hood, and two, it is confusing for our future coworkers who read this and say, did something go wrong here? No, nothing went wrong. This was the expected path. It just has an error tuple. So a better approach can be to use the assert redirect. And here we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. So I'm going to actually go ahead and copy it. where we're going to assert that the view has redirected. We get the path. We're going to ignore the flash, but once again, you could assert things about the flash, and then we're going to assert that that path is the team path. Excellent, it passes. So if you're going to test and you only care that you're redirecting to a page, this assert redirect allows you to do it in a sort of agnostic way, right? Whether we test between two live views that are in the same live session, or you test navigating to a completely different place, if all you care about is that you're navigating to a different path, you can use that assert redirect. And it keeps it agnostic, and so you can even change the implementation, which is something really good. We're testing the behavior, not the implementation. And as you might have guessed, there's one more test we can write, and that's the follow redirect. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that. I'll go ahead and copy the top one. And call this when clicking team follow redirect. And I'm actually going to copy some of these things too. So we follow the redirect, and this should take us to team. And now what do we assert here? The interesting thing is LiveViewTest is smart enough to know that this follow redirect is actually going to another live view. And so rather than returning the OK con, it's going to give us a new mounted live view, which is pretty cool. So this is going to give us the team view and the team HTML. In this case, I'm going to ignore the team view, and I'm going to grab the HTML, and I'm going to make assertions about that. So I'm going to go ahead and say assert team HTML has the string team. Let's go ahead and run that test. And it passes. Perfect. Of course, you can imagine making more sophisticated assertions if we grab the team view. For example, we could even do this right now if we want to make sure that it's the H1 that has that team string in there. We could do this, right? And I can run this test and it would pass. Excellent. And you can imagine you could have more complex flows. For example, maybe you have an onboarding flow that's all live views within the saved live session. You could write a test from the perspective of the user that kept following the redirects and kept grabbing the next view and performing actions on the next view and then transitioning and keeping going. So this follow redirect is a very powerful thing we can use when you want to continue interacting with the pages or when you want to make assertions about what's on the next page. All right, that's it for testing live redirects and testing navigation outside of live views. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at testing live patches. I'll see you there.